Okay, let's get back to this here. As far as the project, I'm going to, I had asked you to work on the user stories, refining it. I don't know if I should, I'll decide in a little bit whether we'll focus on it now or come back, and we will be working with Visual Studio Team Services, so it might take a little bit of time. So what I'll do is, instead of getting into that today, I'll probably do that the Tuesday after we return from spring break. But today what I want to see is for us to get into MVC for the basketball solution, and then for you to start seeing how the connection occurs between MVC and the database. And I told you that in MIS 353, we're going to do it slightly differently. We looked at the database, which I'll call the data layer. Now, what are the other layers? Yeah.
The user interface.
The user interface layer, and what else is there? The one in between. Have you discussed this in 353? What is that layer? Logan?
Multi layer, business logic layer.
Okay, you can in general call it the logic layer. It's usually prefixed with business logic. So in 353, you will see that you're explicitly working on the database with stored procedures, triggers, and so on. You will be creating a logic layer with a class library, and then a UI layer, which is the web application. In MVC, it works slightly differently, in that all of these three layers are actually laid out in the on the object-oriented side itself, the C# side. And so I want you to understand that and see the analogy here. So what we are going to do is go ahead and drop all of the objects. So let's see, so I'll open up my version here. So if I drop all of these tables, I'll come back at some point to discuss the analogy of the tables creation as well as the queries. We saw a query here. Now if I go into this demo table, I just dropped all the tables, so I shouldn't see any of this. So does it mean that my entire database has now been cleaned up? Okay. Megan said no. Anyone else? Am I clean of all of what I created on this database? Okay. TJ, is there anything else that we need to be concerned about?
Stored procedures that we had.
Okay. Where would that exist?
Programmability.
Okay. So the stored procedures don't get deleted with the table. So, so the same principle. What should I do? The simplest way to auto-run this is to do this for all your objects. So just as we had if object exists, drop it. So if this object exists, if it's not null, what do we want to do? We want to drop that object. The only thing is, instead of it being a table, what is it? Yeah, it's a procedure. So any object that you just create on the database, make sure you clean it out during the development process, and this is the simplest script to include. Okay. So now if I refresh my stored procedures, I should not see any. So at this point, basically my database is back at a so-called clean state, and now I can have the MVC start communicating with the database. Okay, so let's see. I want to now go back into my last name basketball solution application. We have a modeling project there. So what I want to do is introduce two other projects into that solution, one being the MVC project. So right-click on the solution and add new project. And this is going to be a C# web application project. One of the things that Microsoft did over the past, I want to say 2 months or so, they introduced this .NET Core. So one of the decisions I have to make over the summer is when you come back in fall, whether we migrate into .NET Core, because they are moving, that's what they're going to be pushing going forward. So again, it might involve some more new relearning, but it might be more beneficial long term. So anyways, let's take at least in this version, my latest framework, .NET framework is 4.6.1. So you can see it's already starting to show up the core, but we are going with the ASP.NET web application for now. It's going to go into the solution space, last name basketball solution. Let's call this last name basketball web app, or MVC. Instead of web app, I'll call it MVC. MVC app. Okay. So that's, if you're not able to see it, let me copy paste it onto this space. So this is going to be, once we make it MVC, it has all of these 3 layers inside of it. So it's not like what you'll see in 353 where the layers get separated. Okay, now instead of an empty ASP.NET template, we are going to use the MVC template. And as soon as you select that, you will see that the core references, essentially the libraries for MVC, get automatically checked. And then the other thing is I want to add unit tests. And it automatically says .test for the project name. We'll go with that. We will be looking at using Azure. The 452 students have been using it. There is a free account that you get as students. So this is Microsoft's cloud-based services. Again, something that companies are looking for. So it will really help to explore and be able to put it on your resume. So we will do that, but for now we are not going to host it, so you can leave it unchecked. And as far as authentication, we'll go with this, the default, which should be the individual user accounts. When would you use Windows authentication?
Whenever SQL Server or database to log in, we're trying to do our local database and not our database.
Okay, that's so. What Megan said is if you are on that same machine, that's true for if you are using SQL Server. But here, when we say Windows authentication, it's for what?
I thought it was tagging on the server.
Okay.
Intranet applications.
Intranet applications, what does that mean?
So for applications that are internal to a company.
So this is for the application that you're developing. So if let's say you're working for, like Logan was working for Plus Consulting, and they are using some web application only for internal purposes, then the authentication, you can use the local authentication on the local machine to basically access into the web application. So that's when you would go with this. But if you're going from somewhere, somebody from outside is going to log in, you have to go through individual user accounts. Okay. And we'll get into that sometime later on in this course, the authentication part. But it's actually, once you select this MVC template with the reference, it will actually add in a lot of pre-built library code that will make this significantly easier to get the authentication working. And I'll show you what's happening. After this sets up, we'll connect to our databases, and you can then start seeing the effects of how authentication works. Since I'm recording this, it takes longer to create the project. So it's taking a long time. Is there anyone other than Liv who is also interested in data analytics? You are too? Okay. So you can see it built in a fair amount, like unlike last time when we created an empty web application, it creates a lot more. The MVC folders are there, but this time not only are the folders there, but there is a lot more code inside it as well. So you can see there is, when you say, you see this account controller here, account view, identity models, all these are for authentication and user management. So one of the things that we are going to do to connect to our database, there are several pieces here. We'll take one step at a time. The first piece is to try to connect our MVC to the database. Now, MVC is going to do a lot of the logic, the UI, and so on, and even some of the data-related material is going to be inside of the model. What is the only thing that MVC cannot provide, which is why we need to go to the database? What is that piece that MVC cannot provide, and what's the database provides? We are not going to be writing procedures and setting up logic on the database. So what was the database originally created for? All of this, like creating procedures, writing programs on the database, it came much later. What was the original purpose of a database? Yeah.
Entering data to the database.
Yeah, it's a data repository. So or if you want to have to persist the data, the only way you can do it is if there is a data store, a data repository, and that's the purpose of the database. And the MVC doesn't have a permanent data repository, so it has to go someplace into a database. Okay, so let's see how we connect to the database. You have to go to this web config. There are two web configs, so you have to be a little careful. Even at this point, I sometimes get confused. I'll close this. So one thing to make sure, in case you already didn't, there are three applications, projects. There are three projects under the solution now, which is the startup project of these three projects. You have the modeling project, the MVC app, the test project. Which of these three is considered the starting project? Modeling, and what tells you that? It's where we are, but what is the clearest sign here? There's something that tells you that it's stuff. Yeah, it's in bold. So usually whichever is the first project you create becomes the start project. So since you already had that, okay. So rename or reassign this as your startup. Right click on the MVC web app, set it as the startup project. And once you have done that, let's stop with that and then move into setting up the connection to the database. And I told you that there are two web config files. One is, you can see it right at the very bottom here. The second is, if you open up the views folder, there's another web.config. So that's not the one that we want to see. So you can actually close the views folder so that it doesn't cause any confusion. And then you'll only see one web config, web.config. So that's the one that we want to get into. So if you open that up, by default it sets the connection to a database. It's called, Microsoft started providing this inside Visual Studio. I'm trying to think what they call it. It's a miniaturized version of SQL Server, and it resides directly inside of Visual Studio. And if you want to do some very small applications while you're sort of locally testing, this would be fine, but we want to set it up where it goes to the server. So I'm going to, the data source, there's a lot of extra stuff that I don't want here. So here it's literally saying it's going to a specific .mdf file that's stored locally. Instead, we are going to have our data source go to the server. So the data source parameter, let's see, what do I want to set it to? So this, if you, and to clarify, all of this comes under a section called connection strings. And finally, before we proceed, what type of file is this? Is this a HTML file? It's, if you look at it carefully, it says XML on top. Does anyone know what XML expands to? What does HTML expand to? Yeah.
It's hypertext markup language.
Yeah, hypertext. and we can get into this a little more, but what does hypertext mean? What is the main thing that it was supposed to do when it was created? Yeah, link. There was something called a hyperlink, which essentially linked documents. So you basically linked documents between. So you have one document which linked to other documents, and actually, some researchers in Europe were doing it in the late 80s, early 90s. But these are, so what about XML? What does that expand? Obviously, the ML is the same, markup language. What does X, yeah, it's extensible. So the difference, so right from the name you should be able to distinguish the difference. So what does that tell you? What does extensible in this sense imply? With HTML, you won't be, there are some standardized tags or elements, right, that you have to use. With XML, it means that you can make up your own tags or extend whatever is there, so that, and here Microsoft is using XML to bring in their own tags, which the .NET compiler understands. So connection strings is one of them that it understands, and we are basically setting it as a property. So if you were to write it as C# code, this is a property inside of a class. So we could write it as an equivalent class C# program code as well. But anyways, coming back to data source, instead of it being a local source, and you can see it's called a default connection, and the connection string, the source is going to be your server IP address, which is 192.146.198. Okay, so this is the IP address, and it directly connects to SQL Server on the server. The initial catalog is your database name. So what's the database name for you? It's this MIST 450 basketball, your last name. It's 450 basketball. 450 demo, last name. In your case, it's whatever you've been using. And this part, integrated security, is only applicable if you have SQL Server on the same machine, or you can use Windows authentication. We cannot use that, so we have to provide a user ID and a password. So user ID is, I'm trying to remember what are the IDs we are using. Is it fall 2017? Fall 2017, and let's see, what else did we have? Fall 2017. Your last name, is that it? That's for the, yeah. So fall 2017, last name, in my case it is fall 2017 demo, last name. Yes.
So I don't know if you believe this, but I have a provider name. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you don't want to delete that, so. So yes, we need a provider name. I'll get to that. If you're not deleted, keep it. Yeah, it's down here. So this is the only reason I'm not breaking it up into like what I just did into. Sometimes it wants everything on one line, but it gives an error if it's not on one line. But I'll just break it down to second line now. Yes.
Is it for how to use UID in the phone?
Instead of the integrated security.
Yeah, I just don't know what UID means.
UID is user ID.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, it's so we are basically separating it out. We are saying what is the SQL Server Engine identifier. In this case, it's the IP address where SQL Server is residing. Initial catalog is the name of the database. Microsoft used to call it database name. It still accepts it, but they decided that now data doesn't only reside in a database. There are other repositories, like even an email server could serve up as can be the data repository. Then you have the user ID, and finally the password. The password is the one, I'm trying to think, last name, is it Mix? It's your Mix user ID. So in my case it is, it's going to be, did I use this one? I think I just used the no last name. But in your case it should be Mix user ID at mix.wvu.edu $2017. I believe this is it. So try this out on the SQL Server login to make sure that it is actually the right password, because if not, it will fail. And we want to make sure that this is not the reason for failing. Okay, so connection string and then the provider name is, we are using a SQL client provided through .NET library. Okay, so just make sure that this actually connects you in to SQL Server by doing it right here. Okay, if it fails like it did for me, then I obviously have to figure out what my correct email on correct login is. Let me just figure that out. Are you able to log in with your with your user ID. So obviously I've forgotten what my demo ID was. Let's see if I can use that. Okay, I'm going to take the one of the students. I'll take one of the students who's not here and use his for now. Okay. Okay, so this sets up our connection to the database. Now we need to,
Just to be sure, you said we didn't need the integrated security.
no, we don't need the integrated security. It's the Windows authentication for SQL Server, so that will only work, as what Megan said, if you have SQL Server on your own machine, or you're authenticating to SQL Server using your Windows authentication. So even if it's on another machine, but you can get to it through Windows authentication. So only then will you use integrated security. So if you're working at home on your own machine, you can do that.
We would need it, or it would be recommended?
If you're working at home on your own machine, then you wouldn't have to add in user ID and password with integrated security. It's either or.
Okay. So you can use the user ID and the password for your own machine.
Yeah, you can. Yeah. Okay. So the next step is to make sure that we are actually connecting to the database now that we've set it up. And this actually involves a tool called a PowerShell tool. It's actually used for network and system administration. So some of you might have seen it. I know Plus Consulting uses it. One of our students in 452 uses this for work. So if you go to Tools, NuGet Package Manager, and go to Package Manager Console. It should open up a Package Manager Console window below, where you have the other regular Visual Studio window. And if you look carefully, it will, it's in there, I think say PowerShell, PowerScript. I'm not sure where it is. But anyways, so over here, we have to do a series of steps. First is to say we have to first say enable migrations. So this is the connection from MVC to database. The first step is to enable migrations. I think it's the plural, and it's not case sensitive. It has this hyphen in between. So just against that PM greater than sign, enable migrations, and it will look for this connection string to connect to the database. Okay, the entity package framework is not installed on project tests. I should want it on the test package. Are you getting the same error here? Yes, no?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it should generate some. It's a little strange still that it's asking for. If you're getting this error message, then yeah.
Mine says it's not determined a valid startup project.
Okay, did you right click and set this to your startup project?
Yeah. But it's saying that it's not. But it's okay.
Okay. Okay, what I did which was incorrect was, you can see where it says default project. Can you see that in the console window? Okay, change it to last name MVC app. So now let me run this. So this is something to be a little careful about. So enable migrations. Okay, it will check if there is an existing database as its target, and we have actually assigned this, so it should find it. Okay, and as Liv said, it does go a little crazy because it creates a lot of extra code once it finds the database. Okay, and it says code migrations enabled. So what it created, if you look carefully, was a folder called migrations, and within that it set up this file called configuration. Okay? And we will be, so you have to make sure that you have this created. If this enable migrations did its work, you should be seeing this. Okay, how many of you are seeing this? Okay,
I still have the error, but it says that it was created.
You still get that error?
I mean, I didn't change anything, but it says underneath it says checking for the target in the database, and then it says code first migrations enabled.
Okay, and you are in this
I have
project.
the folder.
Okay, so let's just continue and see what happens. So the next step after you enable migrations is to add a migration. So the second step is to add migration, and usually you have to give it some name. This is our first migration, so I'll just call it initial. So add dash migration space initial. So if I do this, again, it should, what it's going to do is, it's going to look at all the existing models, and based off the existing models, it's going to generate a series of create table statements. So based off of this, so you have a new file, a C# file created under migrations, and if you look carefully, it has the name of the file, which is initial, which it obviously got from what we created or what we specified as being the name for the migration, right? And what else do you think is in front of it? This is the year, month, day, and this is, I think, the universal time. It's a timestamp to, what's is it saying, 2:18 something. So essentially, it's either the time, but it takes the date and it appends something to it, so that makes it unique. So if you look inside of that initial, you can see a series of create table statements, which if you at this point, if you go to the database, and I'm using Bolaji's database here, you can see that there are no tables. But so what do you think this is going to do? The C# code is going to generate the tables based off of the model, but did we create anything in the model as yet? The answer obviously is no. But if you go into identity models, and this is why I said that it provides, MVC provides you a pre-existing authentication framework through this application user and identity user. And so we will explore this much more as we go forward with authentication and authorization. But for now, it's still not converted it into the database, and the step that takes it to the database is the third step, which is update database. Update dash database will take it into the database. Okay. So go back to the package manager console, update that dash database. Fail. Okay, I gave a wrong instead I used the wrong database name. This Bolaji doesn't have access to this. I have to change this. Okay, let me just rerun this. Okay, if everything goes well, it will say applying the migration, which is the only migration that we have, and running the seed method. Currently we have nothing in our seed method, so the seed method is found under migrations in the config file, but currently there is nothing. So if you go into the database, right-click and refresh the tables, you should see all of the tables that were created or migrated from MVC into the database. Yes? Okay, the issue is, did you log in, did you use the same thing to try logging in here? if it does, then the only other reason for failing would be the same thing that happened with me here with choice. Why did this fail for me? Yeah, the wrong name specified for that particular user, so I had to change it to Missed 450 Basketball last name of that particular student instead of just saying generic last name. Yes.
Were we supposed to, earlier when we dropped all of our tables in there, want us to keep them dropped or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Did it create these tables? Okay. Yeah.
Mine says create database permission denied in database feature.
So that same thing, just make sure that it is your database name is the correct one, because the message is saying that it's trying to create a new database. So basically the database is not existing, so make sure that it is the correct database name. Okay, so how many of you have this? Megan, did it go through for you? Okay, what about Chris?
I can't log in.
What do you mean you cannot log in? Did you log in initially?
Yeah.
So the reason I had you do it earlier was that you used the same login information here as well. If you're doing that, the same, when I say same login, it's the same user ID password. So you can see user ID, semicolon password. So if you just literally copy paste it and then use the correct database name. So Krista, is it going through now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so that you don't have permission to create a new database there, so that's
Right. I didn't hear things go back and forth and basketball here. So
okay. Okay, so that leaves just Chris, Ashley to go through. So again, the thing is, are you using whatever you used to log in? Okay, so the issue is if it's unreliable and it suggests using the lab computer, at least where we are here.
So it's just your last name?
What's that?
It's just not the first connection, it's just your last name.
No, it's very it's very simple. The first thing is for user ID, it's fall 2017, your last name. The password is your mix user ID at mix.wvu.edu, the $2017. If you are logging into SQL Server, literally use a copy paste and then specify the database that you are using on SQL Server. Okay. Once you have that, once you're connected and have, so that tells you that there is this connection between MVC and the database. So this part is working. So once you establish that, the next step, we have about, let's say about 15 minutes. So we'll start exploring how we can start setting up our model on the MVC side and then have it more migrated into the database. we also need to see how we create or set up some sample data. Okay, so let's start with the simplest class in our class diagram. Okay, so just as we did with on the database side, I deliberately spent some time with directly creating tables on the database so that you understood the parent-child associations, which tables you needed to create first. So among these three classes, which one can we create first? It's either college or conference, but we cannot create this connecting link first. So we'll go with college. So go to model, right-click on model, add. You can either go through new item or class, so you can add a new class. And our class is going to be called college. So whatever is the name of the class, you want to call the file by the same name. Okay, so always when you create a new class, make sure that it has public access. If not, it's not going, whatever's inside it will not be usable. So you want to make it accessible from outside. And the attributes or properties inside are college ID and college name. Okay, so those are the only two. So these are set up as properties, public. The first one is always going to, well, this is auto-generated, so we are going to go with an integer. Increase the size of this slightly. Okay, so the first one is college ID, and do you know how to set up something as a property instead of an attribute? If it was just an attribute, the recommendation is it needs to be private, private int whatever. But if for MVC purposes, for MVC, there are no attributes in a class. Instead, there are properties that represent the attributes. And properties are always public. Public data type, int in this case for college ID. And TJ, you said you know how to set up properties. What do you need to do?
I would say auto-implemented properties, like it gets set.
Okay, you can auto-implement. You can also just set it up with these get set. Okay, so basically properties they allow you to either get the value or set a value, and we'll see how we can go about doing that. So there are two properties. One is the college ID. The other is the college name, which is a string. Okay, so these are our two properties. And we also want to set up some extra information on this. So when we were setting up our database, what did we do? When we created the college table, yeah, we specify the columns here. There's going to be a converter that sort of speaks between the two. So the connection from MVC to database there is, once we establish it through whatever the connection string, the communication is going to occur through something called the entity framework. Okay, so the entity framework is Microsoft's version of, so EF is Microsoft's ORM standing for Object Relational Mapper, a mapping tool. So basically this acts literally as a translator. It takes, MVC is entirely in what? This is an object-oriented world. Okay. The database is a relational world. So the ORM basically does the translation between these two worlds. So going back to what Liz said, Liz, all right. I'm sorry. I've now called you by 3 different names. I apologize. Yeah, okay. Anyways, so what Liz said, I'll start calling you by your full name, then I won't make that mistake. So anyways, we need to specify, so this part of it, creating the columns, will be taken care of by the entity framework. What it doesn't know is the constraints. We said, what are the constraints? The first and the simplest one, primary key. So the way you designate primary key is with these square brackets and putting in, they call it an data annotation. So we specify this as being, so what you put on top of the property, the annotation on top indicates it's a key. And you can see that it's saying that there is, well, the squiggly red line indicating there's a problem. So the way you can fix it, go to quick actions and just include this system.componentModel.data annotation. So that reference to the library will basically make this known that it is the primary key. Couple of things. I just want to, we have another 7-8 minutes. So I want to get this done. So we need to have a constructor for our class because we're going to have some means of introducing some sample data. So we'll have 2 constructors. MVC, if anytime you create your own constructor, so in this case we want a constructor that would populate this particular the objects of this class. So when we want to populate the objects of the college class, we need to send in whatever values through parameters of the constructor. Okay. So what do we want to populate here inside? Okay.
College ID and college name.
Okay, college ID and college name. Anyone disagree with Liz? Okay, PJ?
Well, we have to create that positive because they all do
Okay. Remember what we did in the database, what TJ pointed out? In the database for the ID, it was auto-generated, right? So we don't want to provide it. We want the database to give it to us. So we don't need to send the ID in. Instead, the only one that needs to be provided here is the college name. And we are going to get that college name through a parameter for, so I'll just, and basically, you have to be a little careful. Most professional development environments, they want the same name to be used for the parameter as for whatever is accepting that value. And here, what distinguishes it is this, and I also use uppercase to start off the name of a property, while the name of a parameter of any variable is usually starting with a lowercase. So one thing you don't want to do is to say this. Okay, if you do this, what will happen? Well, you can see it's not giving any syntax error. It's accepting it, but what will happen? Will this have? So you're assigning a property to itself, and does this property have any value? It doesn't. So, which means that this will end up being without any value. So anytime you see a row or rows in your database not having any value which you have populated, means you likely did this. Okay. So instead I have to make sure it goes to the parameter. And the reason I said constructors is whenever we create our own constructor, MVC will not, if you don't have any constructor at all, it won't complain. But if you create one constructor, it will say it wants a second one, which the entity framework uses behind the scenes, and that's this empty constructor. This is obviously something that we won't be using, but the MVC, the entity framework, needs it for its purposes, so we need to provide the second one. Okay. So keep that in mind. Anytime you can create your own constructor, you have to provide this empty constructor. Okay, finally, we'll create a method that gives some sample data. I'll say populate college or colleges, plural. It's going to return, it's going to populate and return a list of colleges, and we are going to use this list quite a lot. List with these, does anyone remember what these angle brackets stand for? Okay. Yes?
Generic.
The generic. So there's a generic list, and then we are saying this generic list properties are going to be applied to the college class objects. Okay. So we are going to populate, let's at least populate 2 of these now. So how many minutes? 4 minutes? Okay. So I'm going to create this list object, and I'll call this college list, and a new list of, so I'm basically making this an object, and at the very end, why is this complaining now? Why is this method, what, okay, I'm going, since the, yeah.
You're not returning anything?
Yeah, I'm not returning, and what should I return? Yeah, I need to return this college list. And in between, so now it stops complaining, but obviously I want to get some data before I return this. So I'll create a new college, so college object was new college, and I'll just give it a name. West Virginia University. Okay. So this creates the object. I want to add it to that list. Right? And I'll add this college object to that list. Okay. And the second college, let's see, I'll just add in, well, what were we we had Duke, I think, that was suggested by Logan. You can add any college you want to, but something in a different conference. That we won't be able to explore connecting between colleges and conferences today. But basically, I'm adding in 2 college objects into this college list. Okay. Now, once I had that, I need to do, and there are at least another 2 more steps before you can do anything with this. So the first step, anytime you create a new class, okay, go into identity models, and we have to say we have a new class for which the database has to have an equivalent table. And for that, are you inside identity models? Okay. In identity models, there are 2 classes. The second one is application DB context, and this is somewhat, it can be a little confusing. This is the end of the class. And just before the end of the class is where we want to set up this property, and it's important that you set it up carefully. So I want to make sure I give the correct, let's see, public DB set. Okay. It's a public property, uses DB set, and we are saying this is a database set of college objects, and it needs to go to the database or connect to a table called, usually on the database side, if you see what MVC did, what did it do to all the tables? At the end you have an S to imply it's the plural of whatever the class name is. So a class name is college, so the plural version is colleges, is what we'll set up. And as TJ said, for properties you have to have get and set at the end. And I'm almost out of time now, but I have to do a couple more things. One is, I don't know if I want to do this now. If I do one, I'll have to do the other 2 as well. So I'll stop at this point. So at this point, we're still not moved this onto the database. So when we come back, and by which time we would have surely forgotten, we'll have to, tell the entity framework that we want to move it, and so we'll have to go through a couple of steps to change the migration, because right now if we just do it, it only has these create tables, so we have to add another create table statement. But we'll address that after we come back. So the main thing while you're on the break is make sure your user stories are all completed, and then when you come back, I'm not going to start from scratch, I'll start from here. So make sure that you have a working version until here. That's it. I'll see you after the break.